those of us that have drank the Kool-Aid and understand the magic of camp, we think of it sometimes as magic, but it's really not. There's science, there's chemistry behind it.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. There are summer camp fanatics, individuals who attribute their best qualities to the counselors they had, the songs they sang, the skits they performed, and the friendships they made in mosquito-infested cabins in the woods near a lake. My guest this episode, Matthew Kaufman, is one such individual. Matt attended summer camp, was a counselor, and eventually became a camp director. But he did not stop there. Matt sought to understand the science behind the positive experiences that he and other people were having at summer camps in hopes of bringing those experiences to more people in more locations. The result was his book, The Campfire Effect: How to Engineer Belonging in a Disconnected World. Matt and I discuss his book and things that you can do to bring the summer camp experience to the kids in your life. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If you know somebody whose kids might benefit from more summer camp-like experiences, please like this episode and share it with them. And now, the interview.
I've spent every summer since I was 4 years old at camp. I started as a camper, and I stayed right through and became a counselor, and then eventually became what we call in my camp a division leader, which is sort of an administrator supervising about 15 to 20 staff members and about 80 children. And then after a while, I was promoted to assistant director, and then eventually, my current role is I'm one of the directors of the camp. So it's been my entire life. I joke with people I've never taken a summer vacation in my life. So that's the story of me and camp. It goes back a long, long time.
So, this is a particularly interesting conversation for me because I married into a camp family. So I did not have the camp experience growing up, but my wife is a third generation at the same camp, and my daughter became the fourth generation at the same camp. So I had to learn about camps by extension, but they loomed large in the life, especially in the life of my wife. And at some point, so if anybody is listening, if you know a person who is truly enthusiastic about summer camps, well, then you can picture my wife. But then you also know that they believe that there's something magical going on here. And at some point, Matt, you decided that you want to try to figure out what exactly was going on that all these people, including you, were experiencing as magic.
That's right. And as a camp director, I see families similar to yours all the time, where one of the parents totally gets camp and is sold before they walk in the door on the concept of camp, and the other parent is like, "Well, what is exactly is going on here? Why are we sending our children away? What's going on?" So, the idea for this book was born a little bit out of that exact scenario because I would often say to myself, man, I can really explain what's so special about camp in about 3 hours, but I can't do it in 30 seconds or even 3 minutes. And I said, I should write a book about this. And it was kind of a joke in my head. And like you said, those of us that have drank the Kool-Aid and understand the magic of camp, we think of it sometimes as magic, but it's really not. There's science, there's chemistry behind it. And as I was going through this idea in my head, I did a lot of research, and I realized that it's just chemistry. There is no magic,
Mm.
right? Magic isn't real. And the experience that your wife had, and presumably her parents and grandparents, and now your daughter is having, is grounded in good science, in real science. And that's kind of the idea behind the book, is sort of lifting the curtain, and showing that what camps do can be replicated, and it can be replicated in schools. It could be replicated in families, in your own home. And it was actually very interesting for me to discover that it's not really about being outdoors by a lake, or playing sports. It's about brain chemistry.
And we should mention again the name of the book is The Campfire Effect: How to Engineer Belonging in a Disconnected World. And I have to ask, when you had that thought, I want to look at the science behind what you felt and what you've witnessed so many other people feeling. Did you ever feel worried that that taking something apart might mean that you can never get it back together again, that it might rob it of some of the joy that you've experienced? Did that ever cross your mind?
It's a good question, but it never crossed my mind. And I think the reason for that is that my background is engineering. I have an
Mm.
engineering degree, so I'm very analytical. And I do believe very much in intentionality, and there should be a reason behind everything that we do. So now that you mention it, I think I'm a little worried for other people in my industry.
Right.
So, but not for me, because I have a very strange kind of mind that works in this very analytical and systems oriented way. So not for me, but perhaps for others.
Well, that helps me because, in looking at the explanations, some of the causal arrows that you draw, you got you suddenly, and somehow, given that you're an engineer, you became very comfortable with kind of the neuroscience of this, and in particular you became very comfortable with kind of a set of hormones that you believe are at play here, in this idea of belonging. Um, there's a great quote at the beginning of your book, and you say, "Camp is not a vacation. Camp is a laboratory for human flourishing." So tell me about the chemicals that you believe are involved in human flourishing and how they exist in the right proportions at camp.
Right. So I always like to tell people that what I've done with the brain chemistry is really simplify it. And I don't.
Mm.
I say in the book, I'm not preparing you for a biology exam, right? So this is a simplification, and it's a system that we use to explain what's going on. But the idea behind the chemistry here is these five chemicals: oxytocin, dopamine, cortisol, serotonin, and endorphins.
Hmm.
And the idea is that these chemicals all need to exist for human beings to grow or to flourish. And the way that they exist in camp is in this very specific order. And it's the order that I just mentioned. So the idea behind oxytocin, people may have heard of this as the bonding hormone. It's released when women give birth to children, and they're flooded with oxytocin, and the love hormone, people call it. But it's really about safety, the way
Hmm.
that I'm framing it. It's about trust, and you have to feel physically and emotionally safe, and camps do a really great job of that by the way that they force people to live communally. They have staff that are embedded or enmeshed with the children, so there's a lot of feeling of safety. So there's a bit of oxytocin, and we talk about rituals and all sorts of things that increase oxytocin in human beings. Then the next step is dopamine, which is commonly called the pleasure chemical, and sometimes gets a bad rap, as it should. But it has a lot of benefits. And the way that we frame it in camp, dopamine's not about pleasure, it's about the pursuit of pleasure. You get a spike when you see the food, not necessarily when you eat the food. So the idea that camps set up these very visible measures of how to succeed. And we talk about things like a swim test, right? Like completing a lap during a swim test. There's a visible goal and it's right there, and there's immediate feedback. That's the idea behind dopamine. And then we talk about cortisol, which is I call it the stress vaccine hormone.
Hmm.
Um, so cortisol is when we introduce things that make children feel like they're in a difficult position. And you can't grow unless you're put into those difficult positions. So cortisol is stress. You feel cortisol as stress in your body, but that's not a bad thing. Stress in your body is only a bad thing when it's not supported. And that's when we get to serotonin, which is the support chemical from your peers. So in camp, when you take a swim test, you're not there alone. You're there with your counselors, with your swim instructors, with your lifeguards, and they're all cheering for you and they're all supporting you. So that serotonin helps alleviate the cortisol, allows you to do good things. And then we finally get to endorphins, which is the play hormone. You get it from just being physical, running, laughing, jumping, dancing, and we do a lot of that stuff in camp, and that gives you the energy to kind of reset and do this all over again. So that's kind of how those chemicals all work together in concert, and we do it really well in camp. But the idea is that everyone can do this. It's chemistry, and the chemistry doesn't exist because of camp. The chemistry exists wherever you are, in your classroom or in your home or in your workplace even.
Yeah, and I do want to point that out. I think it's a you're not just trying to explain what happens at summer camps in the Campfire Effect, but your hope is that people can take the lessons of a camp and bring it into their own domain, whether or not that's professional or their home or their classroom or their program. And in fact, you do this wonderful thing in your book where you talk about the Monday morning blueprint, which I'll have you explain what those are because they exist in every chapter.
Sure, yeah. Monday morning blueprint is a couple of small hints that you can take with you beginning on Monday. You don't have to start it on Monday. It's just called the Monday Morning Blueprint. But you can start these things, and they're very easy. They're designed to be simple. They're not these grand theoretical ideas. They're things like a three-word check-in, right? So if you're a teacher and you're dealing with students, you could ask your students for a three-word check-in every day. How are you feeling today? Just 3 words, and that builds oxytocin, right? That makes people feel comfortable. And I acknowledge that these things seem a little bit hokey and awkward at first, and they are. As a camp director, I know how awkward these things can be.
Mm.
But when you keep going, when you do this day after day, it builds on itself and it becomes less awkward, and the positive benefits um, really shine through. So, as a camp director, I deal with a lot of staff that this might be their first job, and they may need a lot of support. And I'm very cognizant that that theory is wonderful, but people need actionable takeaways, and they need them in bite-sized increments. So the Monday morning blueprints are designed to have that effect.
And I should point out that you kind of lead the book with another great line, or I think it happens in one of the first few chapters. You write, "We rely," and you say we. We're talking about humans, of course. Humans rely on the subtle, nonverbal signals that say, "You are safe. You belong." And longtime listeners of Talking About Kids will know that that idea of safety being primary is a theme. We hear this when we talk about resilience. We hear this when we talk about childhood trauma. We hear this when we talk about creating positive school climate. So this idea that you are safe. So this is an interesting one when it comes to a camp, because part of what a camp is doing also, and Matt, I'm not going to say that I completely agree with how you've ordered the different chemicals or even their importance in the camp experience, because there's one thing that in reading your book that I've struggled with here, which is the first thing that from an outsider perspective, because I never attended a sleepaway camp, the first thing that I see a camp doing is taking you out of your existing environment and giving you a new one. Right. So I see that, and I see immediate other sorts of factors at play here. How important, like, if you're trying to establish safety, what about this fact that for so many kids, this is a novel experience, and or it is an experience where they have to leave a different comfortable experience behind to go to a different community?
Yeah, you're right about the order, right? So for most kids, or most first-time campers at least, the first hormone they probably experience is cortisol, right? Because they are moving to a different location, a different experience, different people, and that's homesickness. That's how homesickness presents itself, and we talk about homesickness in the book, and the way that we overcome the homesickness, the cortisol, as it were, is through the other chemicals, the oxytocin, right? That's the primary one, and you spoke about safety, and I think that when you work with kids for a long time, you pick up on these subtle cues. And as you were talking, it just reminded me that when you walk through a camp or a school, if you've been doing it for a long time, you can see the kids that don't feel safe, right? And I'm not really talking about physical safety in this example, but the kids that, their body language just shows they're on guard. um, and that's why I think safety is just so important, because you can't do anything important unless you feel safe. So we try to teach our staff to look for those cues, look for that body language. A child feeling a little bit stretched out of their comfort zone is different from a child feeling unsafe, right? And we have to make that distinction, and it's very important that you bring that up.
Do you think there's something to that, though, to the introduction of a novel environment, something that shakes someone in particular, we're talking about a kid here, out of their existing mindset? I mention that for just a couple of reasons. One is that we know that a lot of these apps that kids are playing with in a digital space rely on this dopamine cycle, right? They're very, very
Yeah.
good at it. And it's that, as you pointed out, it's not just the reward, it's an anticipation of a reward that's driving a lot of use of something like TikTok. In fact, I think that's the only thing that drives TikTok use. And so getting somebody out of that experience or out of a different set of rules, I have to believe that the different location can be your friend. And if it is your friend, then if you're in a household, how do you shake somebody? You do something, the same thing that a camp does, and shake somebody out of their existing mindset and open them to a different experience.
Yeah, I think having a different environment is really helpful. We talk at camp about this is not that, right?
Right.
So when you're at school, that may be acceptable, but this is not that. Camp is not that. And specifically around the idea of cell phone usage, social media usage, I think that in a household, when you can't just take your family and go away for a month, although that
Right.
sounds amazing, I think the way to do it is to carve out time.
Hmm.
So you can have a specific amount of time, and in that time you keep it sacred. And this is not that. So the one that a lot of families are doing is dinner time, right? There are
Yeah.
no phones at the table. That seems like a pretty straightforward, easy win. But I speak about this a lot about how growing up in my house, Saturday afternoons, it was reading time. And my my mother, my father, and my sister and I would sit in the living room, and we'd each have our books, and we would be together, but we would be reading. And if I ever said to my parents, "I'm bored," the answer was reading a book. And I think that there's something great about dedicating a time, whether it's Saturday afternoon or another time that works for your family, to do something that you don't normally do, whether it's reading a book or playing a board game or something, whatever it might be for your family. And I think that when you can't move your physical location, you have to set aside time to make a difference.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that one of the things that Matt is talking about is something that a previous guest, the mediatrician Michael Rich, talked about. And what he was talking about is not saying that there is a no screen time, so it's just a normal time and you just can't use the screen. Michael talks about having a screen free moment, but you're saying yes to something else, right? So it's not that you are just forbidding screens during a time, even a mealtime, but rather you are setting aside a time for community. And what he says is making memories, which I think is an important thing that happens at a camp or in a reading session like you described there, Matt. The, the other thing that I'm interested in is because you also believe that these moments, like the campfire effect, create resilience. Tell me, we've talked about resilience a lot about talking about kids. What do you think is resilience?
So when I think about resilience, I think of certain images in my head. And one of the images that I have is when I was in college, I had to go to the bursar's office to take care of something. And I didn't have a cell phone because that's how old I am. And so I had, I was actually 17 years old at that point, and I had to go to the bursar's office and talk to them about money and tuition of tens of thousands of dollars. And I had no understanding of the concept of money, and I had no idea how to get around the campus, and I figured it out, right? So I solved the problem myself. And nowadays, most of that is dealt with through the parents. And if the child has to do it themselves, they're on the cell phone with the parent, or they're FaceTiming the parent, or they're pulling up, a GPS directions of how to get to
Right.
the office. So when I think about resilience, that's one of the images that comes to mind is the requirement of solving a problem. And I love technology. It's wonderful, but it's eliminated the need for young people and adults as well to solve problems on their own. And I think that's where a lot of the issues with resilience come into play. And the other image that pops into my head is a little more camp specific, and it's an image of a child at the bottom of a ropes course who is very
Mm.
nervous to climb, which is a normal reaction, right? Like it's scary to climb up 30 feet into the air. And what we do at camp is we provide encouragement, and we provide support, and we provide a literal safety net, a safety harness for the child. But we don't do two things. We don't climb for the child, and we don't tell the child they don't have to do it. Now, we're
Mm.
never going to force a child to do it, but we're going to encourage as much as we can. And I think that's a good image for parents to keep in mind is when their child's having a difficult moment, are they telling the child they don't have to climb? Are they telling the child, don't worry, I will climb for you? Or are they saying, don't worry, I'm making sure this is safe and I'm here cheering you on and I'm going to help you when you need help, but you can do it yourself? So those are the images that pop into my mind when I think about resilience.
That example you gave about climbing the rope, in the book, you talk about helping a young man reach a certain swim marker that he was headed for that seemed too far away from him, right? And you bring this up, if I'm not mistaken, in a larger discussion that you were having about how we either set goals that are too far ahead or we only provide feedback after the ultimate goal is reached, right? So part of what you believe is the camp effect or the campfire effect is that in a camp setting or in any, I guess we're going to say any positive setting, you are helping people find those intermediate steps towards the ultimate goal and giving them feedback and or reward at those intermediate steps. Do I have that correct?
Absolutely. So I think one of the difficulties a lot of kids have in school is that they may learn a bit of curriculum, and they may study for a week, and they may take a test, and then a week later they get the grade back. And the grade is a reflection of the effort that they put in a week or two or three ago. And that's not a good feedback loop.
Yeah.
for human beings. We need more immediate feedback loops. You spoke about TikTok, right? Like that is the ultimate immediate feedback loop. So there has to be a way, a creative way to give feedback in the moment and immediately in the moment. Um, this is a very silly example, but it's one of my favorite ones from when I was a counselor for 6-year-old boys. And I bought this safari hat, and I called it the crocodile hunter hat. And every single time I saw a child doing something that I liked, I would stop everything we were doing and we would have a crocodile hunter hat ceremony. And that child would get to wear the hat. So it was this very immediate feedback. And for anyone who's worked with 6-year-olds, this works like a charm, by the way. So
Yeah.
whenever I saw a child throw out their garbage unprompted, or say something kind to a friend, or try something new, or eat something new at lunch, whatever it might be, everything stopped, and we had this ceremony, and it was this immediate feedback. And I had the best behaved group ever because they were all just yearning for this feedback. And what we have going on, and not just in schools, but I think in a lot of places, is you put in all this effort and you don't see any results for a really long time. And humans aren't designed for that. That doesn't feel good for us. So putting in intermediate goals or intermediate steps, or even just feedback as we go along, goes a long way, especially for children, but even for adults.
You point out, multiple times in your book that, different people in a group, and in particular, different kids in a group, are going to be at different spaces, needing different doses of these different chemicals, right? And you talk about, a large dining hall for someone in the beginning might be a sensory overload, whereas somebody sees that as this like as a very community and safe place for them to be. One of the things that I was thinking about in that example, and in particular because a lot of your work involves around oxytocin, that which you also correctly point out can be the us versus them hormone. Um, I think that many of my listeners, especially if they're in a classroom setting or in an after-school program, might have experience where they have a good one-on-one relationship with that kid, but that kid, it hasn't found their space in the rest of the community. So they are getting the oxytocin from you, or maybe one other person in the group. But the goal for resilience and for their own feeling of safety and their own performance is to get that feeling from the entire group. Do you have any advice for how to help somebody pivot from when it's a one-on-one relationship to making it about the group?
That's a tough one, and we see that all the time. And when kids come into camp, sometimes their first friend is the counselor.
Yeah.
And the goal is for that first friend to always remain a friend, but not be the best friend. And the advice that I give, and this is not easy to do, I will admit that, is to try to find a way for that child to be a star.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I think that's really challenging about school is that there are only so many ways for children to be a star in school. There's the academic way. Um, Often there's athletic, and then children tend to try to find humor as a way to be a star, and that's where you get the class clowns. But at camp, there's a lot of different ways. And I remember one time very vividly as a counselor, I had one child, and exactly what you said. I got along great with him. He was right next to me all the time, but he wasn't clicking with the other kids in the group. And just strangely, one day he made a pig noise. And it was unbelievable. It was fantastic. It was so good. Like it was right on.
Right.
So, later that day, um, surprisingly, we had this unbelievable moment of, hey, there's a camp-wide um, uh, animal noise competition,
Yeah.
right? And shockingly, this child won that competition. And it was a big deal. It was an opportunity for him to like get a,
Right.
a little medal and And just be a star. So my reason for sharing that silly story is that there's always a way to find a path for a child to be a star. At camp, it's a little bit easier because we have all sorts of different activities.
Right.
And you may not be a star at soccer, but you may be a star at chess or at arts and crafts. But it takes a little bit of imagination. So if I can run an animal competition, an animal noise competition, I think that your listeners can find something to make that child stand out and gain some status and respect within the group.
I mean, I need it. It's brilliant, Matt. But I really need to point out for the listeners that you're not talking about a participation trophy. You were recognizing this person for something that they're genuinely good at and unique at. And this is because we've discussed on the podcast before, and it's in the larger body of literature, that when we started only trying to boost self-esteem without having anything to ground it in, we actually ended up creating, like, setting up some kids for like a different kind of failure because they believed that they should be good at something without any evidence or any work or anything to help them get to that thing that they wanted to be good at. So I think that's really important. I think it's a really great example. Any other nuggets for the teachers or the direct service providers or even the parents in the audience for making their environment more like a summer camp?
So I'll share my favorite piece of advice, which is a little bit theoretical, but I think the if you have one takeaway, I think it's the idea of creating rituals, creating sacred spaces, sacred moments, sacred rituals, and these rituals make human beings feel comfortable. And if you think about the evolution of human beings, and whether it's religion or anything else, human beings love a good ritual, right?
Right.
Like weddings are typically very similar. There are all sorts of rites of passage that have developed in different cultures. So I would say try to develop a ritual in your environment, whatever that environment might be, that makes sense for your group, whether it's your family or your classroom. And they don't have to be complex, but they do have to be meaningful, and they should be emotional, and they should be scripted, and they should be sacred. So MESS, meaningful, emotional, sacred, and scripted. And the idea of sacred is just it's different from the rest of your day. Uh, we talk. I'm using the word sacred just to mean different and not usual.
Right.
So an example that I give in the book is if you when there's a father who has a son who's just very nervous every day to get on the bus and go to school, and he just comes up with a ritual they do right before he gets on the bus, and he squeezes his son's hand 3 times for "I love you." And that's just three simple squeezes of the hand, and that's just something that he knows we're doing this every day, and my dad's right here with me in this moment. So rituals can be as simple as that, or they could be extraordinarily complicated, as we all know. So that's my one piece of advice that I would love for people to take away.
And of course, kind of those most familiar, for example, with the Harvard University Center on the Developing Child, and what they talk about as the building blocks of resilience. Well, they talk about this participation in a community being in a building block, one of those building blocks of resilience. And of course, that's what rituals do. They connect us with the people around us, but the people that came before us. And if they're done well, they connect us with what we think are the people who are going to come after us, the future as well. So that's so great. Well,
Yeah.
Matt, I want to thank you so much for taking this time and doing the real hard work to map this campfire effect to real science. I think that it's a wonderful piece of work, and so thank you for writing it. Thank you for being a guest on Talking About Kids, and thank you for everything you do for kids.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for what you do in the youth development space. I enjoyed our conversation, and hope to talk to you soon.
That was Matthew Kaufman. More information about Matt and his book, The Campfire Effect: How to Engineer Belonging in a Disconnected World, is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit Talking About Kids, please leave me a note. I would love to hear from you. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.